It'd probably be helpful to put myself on screen. Whoops. Anyway, you guys just heard everything. Well, let's start this over. Here we go. Today in episode 108 of the Redman Group, we have Dr. Warren Farrell, special guest for the entire show. I'm Anthony Dream Johnson, founder of the 21 Convention, CEO of the Redman Group, co-founder of the Redman Group, and CEO of 21 Studios. So joining me on today's show is Dr. Warren Farrell, author of The Boy Crisis. He's also the author of The Myth and Male Power and many books published in over 17 languages around the world. Without further ado, please welcome to the show, Dr. Warren Farrell.
Glad to be with you.
Yeah, glad to have you, man. I'm really excited. We first talked, a few months ago in late 2019, and
Yes.
Real pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to it, Anthony.
Yeah. And so for you guys watching, make sure to pick up his book on Amazon. Link is in the description. There's an Audible copy you can get for free by using the trial they have there. And this is the paperback I have. I think it's a hardback too, I believe.
Yes, there is. Actually, the one that I probably most recommend is the Audible. A lot of men, especially, really like listening to it on the way to work or at the gym or that type of thing.
Yeah. So my first question, I have about 57 questions for you in my little notepad here. I've been digging through your book past couple weeks, and like I mentioned to you before we went live, I've heard your work, and particularly The Myth and Male Power, referenced to me hundreds of times. I mean that literally, and both on the internet, podcast, as well as on my conference, people mention it over and over again. But my first question is kind of personal, and you're from a different generation than me. You said you're turning 77 here in a few days. Yeah.
57, give or take 20 years.
Yeah, it's good. I think, yeah. So my first question, though, is, I grew up in America. I was born in the late 80s, and I grew up basically in the 90s as a child. What was it like growing up in America as a boy in your generation and your time?
Well, yeah, really interesting. Yes, and I am 76 today and 77 next week. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, and so therefore, doing the math, I grew up in high school in the McCarthy era. And I got my first way of getting in trouble was to speak around the school, and this is 8th grade now, about the fact that, well, wait a minute, shouldn't we be listening to the perspectives of the Russians as well as us? And it was looked at like, not just by the students. They didn't really know that much at 8th grade, but the teachers, like, what's wrong with you? Do you come from communist parents? Is something. My parents were conservative. They voted Republican, Eisenhower. And so, but I went shortly after that, when I got into the 9th grade, my father got a job offer in Holland. And so the family moved to the Netherlands and to The Hague. And there I started talking about some of these issues. And it was like, everybody was nonplussed. It was like, everybody knows that the two bullies in the world are the Soviet Union and the United States. They're 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. They just have different ideologies, but they're the same self-righteous personalities, and nobody listens to anybody. And so I think that probably planted my first seed as to feeling that there was a need to be listening to somebody other than ourselves. But I was rejected and ostracized for that at a mild level. And then, but when I got over to the Netherlands, it was like, yeah, of course. And so I began to tap into, well, maybe my thinking is not so strange, so, out of ridiculous, infantile, naive, that type of thing. And so I began to have a little bit of faith that I had something to potentially offer. And that particularly what I had to offer was not an ideology, that is, communism is better or capitalism is better, but rather the ability to listen to a different perspective other than my own.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that you've been speaking up since such a young age. Topic aside, it sounds like you've been a troublemaker since you were very young.
Yeah, that's. I guess you could, in a way, say that. And I never. This is. Anyone that knows my personality knows that. I'm really inherently. I'm more of a diplomat than anything else, and I'm. Sort of very tuned into little nuances that people have, and you'll probably see a lot of this in the show, but I do have this very strong feeling like there's certain things that are unfair, and that you can do one of two things with things that are unfair. You can either keep them to yourself, or you can speak up about them. And to me, when I see something that's unfair, that's destructive to a group of people, then I feel there's a moral obligation. If I feel like I could be of help to the advancement of understanding of that group of people, then I feel there's a moral obligation not just to shut up, but to speak up.
Yeah. Hell yeah. And so would you say this experience when you're young, did that foreshadow what happened later with the Feminist Now organization? Because I was reading
Oh,
today in your bio, I think you're the only man in American history to be elected 3 times to the Now organization for feminism. That was back in the 1970s.
the Board of Now in New York City, yes. It was not the entire Now chapter, but the New York City
Okay.
chapter of Now.
Yeah.
And so yes, that is accurate. So what happened there was I was doing my doctoral dissertation in political science, and the women's movement surfaced. And so I went to my doctoral committee and I said, and my students at Rutgers University were saying, Dr. Farrell, when you talk about the women's movement, you have fire in your belly. Is that what you're doing your dissertation on? No, I was doing it on politics of grants and aids. And they said, you got to do your dissertation on the women's movement. And so I went to my doctoral committee, suggested that, and they said, oh, Warren, you're a really good student here. You don't want to waste your time on a fad. It's going to be gone by the time you finish your dissertation.
Wow.
I said I disagree. I think that what's happened here is that we've moved from a survival-based culture where women and men had to have rigid roles. Women raised children, men raised money, and both sexes were restricted and confined. And we're now, for the first time in history, getting up enough of the survival that in countries where there's a mastery of survival for at least the middle and upper middle class, the rules are going to change, and they're going to be saying, women, you can have more freedom to be whoever you want to be. And where I made my mistake was saying, and they'll be saying, men, you'll have more freedom to be whatever you want to be. The woman part turned out to be very visionary and accurate. The man part took a lot longer to happen. And I did eventually understand why it took a lot longer to happen, because we are biologically invested in having men be disposable, and therefore, and to be we call men heroes when they're willing to die for us. Very few people want to give up protection. But the feminist movement made a fundamental mistake, and I am part of this mistake. So I'm not sort of blaming them, I'm blaming us, or holding us accountable. And that mistake was that we grew out of the civil rights movement. And the civil rights movement clearly had a hierarchical arrangement. And the arrangement was slave owners and slaves, clearly hierarchical. And then the feminist movement was very much oriented in Lenin and Marx, and believing that there was the oppressor class, and there was the oppressed, the owners, the workers. And so clearly the people that earned money, the people that didn't earn that much money. So at a glance, it looked like men were the equivalent of the slave owners, the owner class, because on average we made more money. But what was missing, and sometimes we made more money for the same work, and that is real discrimination. And what's left of that, I will always fight against. But what was missing from our feminist thinking was that, yes, it wasn't actually men that earned more money than women. For the most part, with exceptions, it was dads who earned more money than moms. That when men and women became dads and moms, men tended to give up jobs that were fulfilling, like teaching in an elementary school, and said, okay, teaching doesn't pay enough. I've got to become a salesperson of whatever. And then if they were a salesperson locally, if they had 2 or 3 children, they realized that they should take that job to be the national salesperson because it'll pay twice as much. But that created the father's catch-22. And the father's catch-22 is that men learn to love their family by being away from the love of their family, and they didn't complain about it because that was what they felt made them a hero. That's what they felt made them a provider. That's what they felt made them valuable as a man. But what we as the feminist movement did is we took that increased amount of money that men made from male sacrifice to give up something they love, like being a musician, an artist, a writer, and and which were the fulfilling occupations almost invariably earn less money because more people want to do fulfilling occupations, and so the supply of people wanting to do fulfilling occupations is enormous. The demand is much smaller. We
Yeah.
all need our garbage picked up a lot more than we need a lesson in art history.
Tradesmen, basically.
What's that? Yes, and
Yeah.
so what we as feminists missed is we took that additional amount of money that men felt obligated to make, and didn't realize that we had defined male power as feeling obligated to earn money that often someone else spent while we died sooner. And we learned to call that power, and we called that power, we called that privilege, and we called that
Yep.
entitlement, when in fact it was the opposite of privilege and entitlement. It was fulfilling our responsibilities and obligations, and it was giving up the privilege to be the musician, the privilege to be the elementary school teacher, the artist, the writer. My own dad said to me when I was in high school, I began to show some interest and I think a little gift in writing, and so and my dad always fought me every time I wanted to go to the library to write my first book in high school. He said, you got to finish, weeding the garden, moving these rocks with me, doing these things. And he said, Warren, I need to teach you how to work. And besides, if you want to, if you ever want to get married, if you want to be a writer, only about 1 out of 100 writers get published, and almost and the average amount of money that a writer makes on a book is about $5,000. It was less than that at that time.
Yeah.
And so he said, if you can't find a publisher, you'll never find a wife, Warren. And then he
that seemed to work out pretty well for you.
Yeah, it worked out okay.
Yeah.
Yes, but not
Yeah.
without it's gone up and down. It worked out extremely well when I was speaking from the feminist perspective. As soon as I started writing and integrating men's perspectives, I went from, I've probably lost well over $20 million from the difference between what I was making when I was speaking only as a representative of the board of the National Organization for Women in New York City versus speaking much more empathetically toward men as well.
Yeah.
And never giving up my support for women. And anyone that discriminates against women, if I'm in a crowd of men's issues people and they're sort of putting women down, I sound like the group feminist. And so
Yeah. I was going to mention that feminists today, I'm sure they, to put it bluntly, they mostly hate you or despise you, but you still speak up on behalf of women's issues and issues for girls too, and you make that very clear at the beginning of the book.
Yes, and I hope throughout the book, because sometimes people make things clear at the beginning of a book like The Boy Crisis, and then they me, Mr. Fair, and then then you watch the subtleties of the way they weave things throughout. And so I hope that I weave that empathy for women and girls issues, and adding boys and men's issues. From my perspective, we're all in the same family boat. And when only one sex wins, both sexes lose, and so we're all in this together.
Yeah, it's actually something I wanted to talk to you about later in the show. Let's talk about it right now, though. So that statement you just said, when only one sex win, or I have the quote written down, but exactly what you just said.
Yeah, when only one. This is the only quote that I remember from what I wrote.
I had it written down verbatim here, but I agree with you on that. The sexes are complementary; they're made for each other, and they win together.
Yes.
However, there are some people in the men's community, the manosphere, that disagree with you on that. They have the opposite sayings, such as for one sex, basically one sex has to sacrifice their sexual imperative for the other one to win. So it's a win-lose kind of thing. For one sex to win, the other has to lose. I think it's a very negative and non-factual assessment of human life. But you have the opposite, and I agree with you on that.
If it was negative and factual, I'd go along with it because I don't.
Sure.
But it is negative and completely the opposite of the truth. I mean, I guess a good story that way to really create a metaphor for this is the story, and this isn't probably not a true story, an apocryphal story, but of a man who was years ago with a horse and a buggy, and he's going through town, and it has just rained, and the horse gets the wheels of the buggy get stuck in the mud, and he tries to get the wheels out, and he can't do it. So the strongest man in town comes along and says, well, let me try. And he tries and he can't do it. And then a weaker man like me in town comes along and says, I think I can do it. And everybody laughs at him. And he says, but he gathers around 20 or 30, other men and women, and together they all get the horse and buggy free. And so when we're working together, and we know how to work together without not listening, without putting each other down, without making our differences paramount, but finding out how we can respect each other, that is the formula for winning.
And would you say parenting is maybe one of the highest expressions of that, together in a stable two-parent family?
Yes. Now, the parenting is absolutely one of the most useful methods of winning, and also
Yeah.
one of the clearest examples of why we're not winning. So there's two major things happening in parenting. One is when I was doing the research for the boy crisis, what I found was that the boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. So I started thinking back from that. Well, why don't dads reside in many families? And it was because in the group that had been married, it was because of divorces. And after divorces, there was a minimal amount of father involvement. And we all know, if you're listening to this podcast, that the divorce courts are enormously biased against men. But even take away that bias against men for a moment and go to the next level and say, well, why are couples divorcing? And for the most part, the couples were divorcing because they didn't feel heard by their partner. They brought something up and their partner became defensive. So they stopped bringing things up because every time they did, it only escalated and got worse. And so I began to see that the Achilles heel of all human beings is our inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. And so I said, is there a way around that? So I started researching that and seeing that that historically speaking, if you heard criticism, it might be from a kinship network or a neighboring tribe. The fear was that might be the sign that kinship network or tribe was going to be a possible enemy and it's going to attack you. So it was functional for survival to get up our defenses. So built into our psyche is a need to detect the slightest little nuance that might be a hint of negativity being covered up by some polite diplomacy. And so, when we hear something even positive and it has that little nuance of negativity, we hear the butt train coming around the mountain and we start preparing ourselves. And so the propensity is to become defensive or to kill the enemy before the enemy kills you. And so And so therefore no one that loved each other felt safe saying what their concerns were that would appear to the person who was hearing them as a criticism, and so they started to get further and further apart from each other, and that ultimately led to divorces, and that ultimately led to children having minimal or no father involvement, or what I call dad deprivation. And that dad deprivation is where is what it leads to girls and boys most doing worse. I found when I did the research for the boy crisis in more than 50 areas of development, both boys and girls. The main difference between boys and girls is that the developmental levels, the impact negatively on boys from a lack of father involvement was much more significant in terms of committing suicide, taking drugs, feeling not understood, withdrawing into video game addiction, withdrawing into porn addiction, withdrawing into alcohol, gambling, gangs, ISIS, dealing drugs. Destructive behavior was much more likely to manifest at a more intense level for boys than it was for girls.
Would you say that lopsided effect, it's negative for both boys and girls, you're saying, I believe that 1,000%. Would you say it's negatively affecting boys even worse because they lack a same-sex parent to model after as like a role model?
Yes. I think for starters, it is that they lack a same-sex parent, and they don't know who they are as a boy. Second, we give girls a lot more permission to express feelings, and so and moms are very much more protective, and so as a rule. And so when a girl is upset, she cries, and the mom sees that she cries, and because she's a mom and she's been a girl that's exact same age, she gets it. And
You mean she
so
can empathize firsthand?
but she exactly, that's what I mean by she gets it. She remembers that her own experience is like that, and the girl is feeling like, oh my God, I'm a disgrace. I have some blood that's happening. What is this disgraceful thing? I can't tell anybody. And mom sort of almost, she can intuit all the little the nuances of things that she did when she was a girl to cover up the quote disgusting blood that she was getting that was called her period, and so she picks those things up like that.
Yep.
Whereas the equivalent for a boy of masturbating or something like along those lines, or needing or wanting to watch porn, is not something that she had that drive for, that a boy has. And so that's level number one. Number two is that the boy without a dad experiences two types of voids. One is a dad void, and the other is a void in postponed gratification. As a rule, moms set more boundaries. And remember, all these things can be reversed with different moms and dads. Moms set more boundaries. Dads enforce boundaries more. So, for example, moms and dads will pretty much both say, sweetie, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. Moms will be slightly more likely to say that, but yeah, it's pretty much similar, very similar. The children will almost invariably try to have as few peas as possible before they have their ice cream. And the difference comes not in the boundary setting so much, and not in the boundary testing, but in the boundary enforcement. If there's a divorce, let's say there's a divorce, and the child is, wanting to have his ice cream before he finishes his peas, mom is likely to say something like, "Oh, sweetie, I did say you should have your finish your peas before you have your ice cream. So I'll tell you what, have this many more peas." And maybe she takes a knife and separates out half the peas, and the child is realizing, okay, I can negotiate with mom. Okay, so now I have half of that half, and I say, "Mom, I've had a really bad day at school. Jimmy tried to bully me again." And mom says, "Oh yeah, that's terrible." And and also there's we're divorced. He must feel like lonely that he hasn't seen his dad for a while. Okay, I'm not going to get into a big argument over a few peas. That's insensitive and ridiculous. It's of wrong priorities. Okay, sweetie, I understand. I'll tell you what, just have you can have your ice cream now. Whereas dad is more likely to say, "Sweetie, I said you can't have your ice cream till you finish your peas." "Oh, Dad, you're so mean. Mom lets me have it. He isn't like that to me." Well, your dad's house. This is dad's rules. And gets all upset. "Sweetie, you can continue crying and yelling at me like that, and then there'll be no more ice cream tomorrow night either." And now the kid sees where it's going. It's only going to get worse if she or he complains, and there's not going to be a deal that dad's going to make. And so the child says to the child with the dad is much more likely, and this is the key, with dad, the child is more likely on focusing on doing what she or he needs to do, finish the peas, before they get what they want to have, the ice cream. And the ADHD level among children living primarily with dads is only 15%. The ADHD level with children living primarily with moms is 30%, twice the level. And one of the reasons you can see in that example is that with the dad, the child learns that there's no benefit in not learning how to finish your peas. That is, postpone gratification, and doing the thing you don't want to do in order to get what you want to have. Whereas with mom, the child is much more likely to become manipulative, coercive, exhaust the mom. And so you hear moms saying how overwhelmed they are, and she has to repeat things over and over again because the last time she said something, he was able to manipulate a better deal. So when she says something, he only goes back to manipulating. And that's just one of a dozen examples that when I did the research for the boy crisis, that I found are differences in dad style parenting versus mom style parenting that
Yeah.
lead to children doing so much better when they have a combination of both style parenting, because moms are very much more likely to be protective. They're much more likely to say, sweetie, you sang that really nicely. You could be a singer. Do you know that you could really be a singer? But unless the children have the discipline, the dream of becoming a singer cannot be followed through with the discipline that it takes to do anything artistic well. You have to be in the upper 1% to be able to survive and prosper doing that. And so that's just an example of some of the things that to address your original question, which is,
Yeah.
don't parents work well together? And yes, my findings for the boy crisis were that the children who do best have what I call checks and balance parenting. That is a balance between the mom's protector instinct and the dad's set disciplines, enforced boundary instinct, tough love instinct. One of the big differences is the misunderstandings, feeling that moms have unconditional love, dads don't. That is not accurate. Moms and dads both have unconditional love. Dads just have more conditional approval, which is part of their unconditional love.
Got it. My follow-up question to this, hearing you talk all the way through this example of the story, right? The peas and everything, and now the follow-up. What do you think some of the, or do you have, what are your thoughts on the primary driver for those differences in parenting instincts? Testosterone, for example, comes to mind for me because in my understanding, men have much higher testosterone levels than women, across the spectrum. Is that one of the drivers for that difference?
I'm sorry, your voice was coming through muffled, and I couldn't
Yep.
hear what your question was.
Is it voice clear now?
That is clearer now. Yes, thank you.
Oh, yep. So my question is, what do you believe some of the top drivers are for that difference in parenting style? Specifically, you're saying instinctually that mothers and fathers parent differently and that they work together. With fathers, though, you're saying that there's more discipline involved, there's more delayed gratification. For example, is testosterone being higher in men, is that a driver for why that's happening and why women are engaging in different parenting styles?
For sure, and all of and part is the survival thing that dads were both moms and dads historically learned that their job was not about thinking about women's rights, men's rights, privileges, opportunities, things like that. The world was not based on the patriarchy that we say it was based on. It was based on the need to survive. And to survive, we taught both sexes to play roles, or both sexes evolved roles that they played, because women bore children. That led to women raising children. And because men raised money or killed animals or did the creation of the things that fed the family, dads got into that. So we, even throughout animals realize that that a father wild wolf will train the children, to the baby wolves, to go out away from the mother and learn how to survive in the wilderness and take risks and know what risks to take and what risks not to take. Men have almost always historically taken the risks outside the home, the risks of being killed. And so my father, as I was mentioning before, he was saying, Warren, you may be a good writer, you just can't make a living doing it. And, and I'm going to teach you at least how to do good, hard labor. So you're going to at least know how to do that. I'm going to teach you to have discipline, so you'll be able to, because you thrive in the world, not on your dreams, but you thrive in the world on either the discipline to fulfill your dreams, which only a small percentage are able to do, or the discipline to do what will predictably earn more money. And you'll predictably earn more money by figuring out what your talents are, and doing your computer science, or historically doing working as a car mechanic, or working as a salesperson selling product X, or that type of thing. But you have to first figure out what makes money, and then within the framework of what makes money and can provide for your family, which of those things you can do the best, not the other, not figuring out what you'd love to do and follow your dream. That's and so whereas moms, seeing the children's talents, they want that talent to be nurtured, and they're less likely to think about sort of wanting the idea of saying no. You sang that song poorly. You need to go back and rehearse the a cappella lessons that you had last week in order to bring your notes up. And then the child starts crying. I've been working all day. And the mom, seeing the child cry, feels, oh my goodness, I'm discouraging the child. Whereas the dad feels, I'm teaching the child how to win. Whereas one of the differences in dad style versus mom style parenting is dads will play much more active games with children. And when I was, when our daughter was about 11 or so, and I played soccer with her, when she didn't really focus, I would kick the ball through to the goal, even though I could do that every time with her at 11. But I saved my kicking the ball past her for when she wasn't focusing or when she wasn't doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
And she would sometimes start crying because, she had the goal scored on her. And for me, that was the way of teaching her how to be better and better. So she lost in preparation for her knowing what she did that made her lose, in preparation, therefore, for her becoming a winner. But that does not come naturally to moms.
Yeah, what's coming to mind, not only the discussion of winning and all this, what's really coming to mind as you speak is the concept of risk assessment, and that fathers and mothers are teaching that in different ways. The mother is focusing more on the dreams and the aspirations, whether it's art or music or writing, from your own experience with your own father, and then he was focusing more long term on risk assessment for you going out into the world and pursuing a career. What was more reliable and lower risk?
Absolutely, and you see exactly this. Excuse me. In everyday life with moms and dads, the child might say, Mom, can I climb the tree in the backyard? And mom will go, well, maybe in a few years, sweetie, but right now you're too young to do that. And so the child runs to dad and says, Dad, can I climb the tree in the backyard? And the dad goes, okay, just be careful, okay, sweetie? And so the kid goes out to climb the tree, and the mom says, wait a minute, I just said you couldn't climb the tree. I asked Dad, I said I could. Whoa, come back here. Dad, what's this about? I just told her or him that she couldn't climb the tree. Well, I think she can. They get into a big argument. But the argument can be a functional argument if they're both listening to each other. For example, the mom can say to the dad, all right, the child can climb the tree, but under 3 conditions. Condition number 1, she or he doesn't go up too high. Condition number 2, the branches, these branches you can't go on because they're too fragile. Condition number 3 is you're out there under the tree. So if our daughter or son falls, you'll be able to protect them from really hurting themselves and getting a concussion. And number 4, give me your cell phone if you're going to go out there, so you don't get distracted. And so, so what's happened now? The child has gotten the opportunity to take risks by climbing the tree, but also have protection. And so, interestingly enough, when fathers are parenting children alone, they're far more protective, and they incorporate the mother role of protective than they are when they're parenting children with a mom, where they just expect that the mom will take care of the protection part.
That's really interesting. I've not heard that before. That the father will he'll modify his own parenting style in the absence of a mother.
Yes, exactly. Not to the degree that the mother does, but to a much greater degree than normal. And so what's happened, and here is why it is so important, that what happens when that child climbs the tree is that the brain synapses start firing much more quickly about, what branch is going to be safe, what branch is not going to be safe. Can I go up any higher than that? Can I get away with going higher than mom told me I could do, and still convince mom that I wasn't violating anything? And so, and this increases both psychomotor functioning and IQ. Now, I have never heard a dad say to a mom, I really want our children to develop much more sophisticated psychomotor functioning and a higher IQ. You want our children to have a higher IQ too. Here is the way here is why climbing a tree at that level helps that. Here is why roughhousing, we now know, is associated with an increase in empathy, an increase in social assertiveness versus aggressiveness, therefore social skills, and an increase in postponed gratification when it is done with the normal boundary enforcements that dads do that at. Dads don't say those things, and dads don't say those things because even if they read parenting magazines or books on parenting, that's nowhere in the books. And so I felt so obligated to have whole sections of the boy crisis on how dads parent differently than moms and how to combine the best to get that checks and balance parenting. And for dads to be able to say, here is the relationship of roughhousing to empathy, the roughhousing to social skills, like distinguishing being assertive versus aggressive, and then to say them to moms, and not to say them to moms like, I'm right, you're wrong, but to say that to moms like, here's what I know you have to contribute. What more do you think you have to contribute? Here's what what I've learned that I need to do in order to help the children develop this type of balance. You want our children to achieve that dream of becoming the musician. I want our son and daughter to achieve that dream of becoming the musician. You foster that dream, and I foster it differently by helping our children have the discipline to become that musician.
Yeah, this is fascinating. This is fascinating. I was going to add on that. I had a quick quip on that, but I can't remember it now. Brain fart. Anyway, we'll move on to I have a whole list of questions.
When you get to be my age, you'll have more of them. So, introduction.
Yep. So let's get into some more of the questions I've written down. So actually, not even written down, but this came to mind right before we started the show. So the title of your book, of course, is The Boy Crisis, and it sounds from talking to you, there's actually several motivations for choosing that title. Can you talk to me about the top 2 or 3 motivations for why you chose that title in the first place with your co-author?
Yes. Well, one of the reasons, one of the things I really have discovered over the years is that, biologically males were chosen based on our ability to protect, our willingness to be disposable. So, we fall in love with the officer and the gentleman, not the private and the pacifist. Women, and in doing so, what the woman is falling in love with in that officer and a gentleman is his commitment to protecting, his commitment to being willing to die, so that the woman can live and that children can live and that others can live. And so we've always, historically, every generation has had its war. And in each generation's war, we've historically told boys that at the age of 7, 8, 9, look at Uncle Joe. His picture is on the mantle, and he died in World War II. But he got to be all the way up to be a colonel, and we're really proud of him. He as a result of men like him, we're not under Nazi rule. And the boy learns that I can be a hero. I can make a difference. If in the next war I go off and I serve, I come back with a uniform. Girls will be attracted to me. Parents will respect me. The community will respect me. I will be something. And even if he's not doing well.
A quick comment. Stefan Molyneux spoke exactly on this issue of men going to war and these reasons why and what happens as a result. And he got on YouTube, these feminists just went after him for it. For saying the exact same things you're saying. It's just a hallmark right now for me.
That is so sad. That is really sad. And one of the things you have to, if you're a man, that follows men's issues and cares about men's issues, and you watch this podcast, do not do anything with it unless you are able to handle criticism.
Yep.
Because you will receive it. If you love women, which I do, understand that the great majority of women will not be able to hear you. You'll have to listen and listen and listen in order to be able to share something lovingly. But back to your question, is one of the differences between the boy crisis and the myth of male power is that in the myth of male power, I'm addressing women and men about what happens to men. women do not have a protector instinct toward adult men. They expect men to sacrifice to protect them. So when women hear men saying, I have a problem too, biologically, what that feels like to a woman is like scratching fingernails on a chalkboard.
Yep.
Women do not fall in love when a man complains to a woman that feels like a whining man. Women do not fall in love with whining men. They fall in love with alpha men. And here is the dynamic. And so the first thing, so with the boy crisis, there's a different dynamic biologically. When I talk about the challenges that boys have, um, women who are mothers, even feminist women who are mothers of sons, begin to have the instinct to protect the son is there. And so when she hears something empathetic about the boy's fear of taking a sexual initiative, let's say when he's 14 years old, and he's coming to mom and saying, Mommy, I really love Krista in school, but, she's really pretty, and all the other boys, I'm sure she's more attracted to the other boys than she is to me. And mom sees the vulnerability of that boy and says, Sweetie, you're a wonderful, sensitive, caring boy. And maybe Krista's sitting home waiting for a call from you, and maybe she likes you, but she hasn't heard from you. So you need to pick up the phone and call her or talk to her about other things, and then get to know her a little bit and have her get to know you. But what mom is seeing in that boy is the vulnerability. Whereas if I say men fear taking sexual initiatives with women, when the woman is thinking about adult men, she's thinking, oh, right, fear. I told the guy at a bar once, do not buy me another drink. I need to go. And he said, no, here's another drink. I've already ordered it for you, sweetie. And and then he tried to ply me with another drink. She doesn't say he bought me another drink and I have the responsibility to whether I drank it or not, but says I was plied with another drink, which is victim talk by the guy. But the important thing that she's trying to say to us is he didn't seem to her to be that sensitive about fearing rejection. In fact, he was fearing rejection. He was just doing all these behaviors that have in the past worked for him about moving the woman from no to maybe to yes. That men do find that when feminists say that what is there about no that you don't understand, the male experience of that is when women have said no to me before, and then I talk to them a little bit more, I buy them another drink, or I ask again in a different way, or I give them more coffee to wake them up, or I give them more alcohol to relax them, or I talk more about them, or I talk more about myself. Sometimes that no moves to maybe, and sometimes that maybe moves to yes. That's what there is about no that I don't understand the history of my interactions. But if you say that about men, women have all those overwhelmingly negative experiences that come to mind, and they just can't even hear it. If you say that about her son's fear of calling Krista, the mom, even the feminist mom, has a different experience of the vulnerability that she or he protects. Now, I'm going to go from there to a much bigger picture on this issue of the biological differences. In all animals, with 3 or 4 exceptions, when I say animal, I mean from insect right up to human beings.
Okay.
About 85% of reproduction happens between the female and the alpha male. And so the woman the female is constantly looking for the male who will best be able to protect her. So let's take buck elks as an example. So the female buck elk will look for the male buck elk who has grown the biggest rack. And to grow that biggest rack, that exhausts 30% of the calcium, the nutrition, and the minerals of that buck elk. So the buck elk, with the exhausted minerals, nutrition, and calcium, the second he reproduces, if he doesn't get rid of that rack right away by rubbing it against a tree, he's likely to die before if the winter sets in before he's able to replenish that nutrition.
Wow.
So the point there is that that men's weakness is our facade of strength. The buck elk, that was the alpha elk with the biggest rack, had the biggest facade of strength. The mother reproduced with him because the mother would get the greatest amount of protection from him without regard for whether or not he would die later. Because what she cared about was her being protected and the children being protected. What he cared about was having sex with the being the one to win the sexual privileges with the woman. And the very fact that we call it sexual privileges gives us a hint as to where the power lies. If for him, it's a privilege. For her, it's an opportunity to cash in on getting the greatest amount of protection for not just herself, but her children. And this is an instinct that surfaces. This is not women greedy, men not greedy. Women are willing to die to protect their children, but they're even happier to find a man who will die to protect them and their children.
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting that you go all the way from insects to elk to human beings, and
Yes.
you see the same behavior. You might be familiar with it. Maybe about a year or two ago, there was research that came out showing that, like you're saying, most men, human beings throughout history, have not reproduced. Women, by and large, have reproduced, obviously, but men, it's only a small percentage, maybe 30% or something like that. Basically, the alpha males are the ones that reproduced throughout history, and everyone else just got weeded out of the gene pool.
And you see this, and you were seeing this. So one of the reasons I'm concerned with the boy crisis is that when boys don't produce well, it's not just that boys are not producing well. Women who are thinking about having children are looking for men who are not living in their standing on unemployment lines and then going back to their parents' basement and living there and watching video games. They're looking for productive men. They're looking for successful men. They're looking for motivated men. And increasingly, as women provide more income, they'll be looking for emotionally sophisticated and intelligent men who can both express feelings, know how to work with people, know how to work with children. And so when boys lose, girls lose. And when girls lose and boys lose, the children lose because they only end up having one parent. Moms say, the selection of men that are out there that are attracted to me, that I'm attracted to, they're, the 5% that are the winners and that are, taller than I am and that are relatively good looking. They seem to be attracted to other women, or they're gay, or but I'm not getting them. So rather than having to compromise with a man, I'll raise a child by myself. And so what the woman doesn't realize is that, particularly if she has a boy child, but also if she has a girl child, that is a high risk operation. There's millions of children raised by single moms that do quite well, and some that do very well. But it's a little bit like putting your child in a car drunk in San Francisco and asking him or her to drive drunk to New York. The chances are fairly good that they'll get there safely, or have just a minor accident. But you're increasing the risk. And so what I found at the beginning, and when I was in the board of NOW in New York City, I first began to see some of this data in the 1970s. And I brought this up to the NOW members who were my board members, and they were a little bit disconcerted, saying, well, wait a minute, if you're saying dads are so important, that means we're not going to give women the free choice to raise children by themselves, or the free choice to make a decision as to who the children should be with when there's a divorce. And I said, well, isn't our mission here to make sure that we have better children if a mom, becomes pregnant and has a child? And they went, our primary mission here, Warren, is that we give women freedom of choice and trust women to make that decision the way they feel is best for the children.
And let me guess, how dare you advocate one position over the other? Because that's yeah. I've noticed this as well, that feminists always want to present things as an equal choice, or the choice is priority, but behind that, there's hidden agendas. And it sounds like you agree that women do have a choice, but you're advocating for what is, based on the data and based on facts, a better choice to two-parent household.
Yes, actually, I'm saying women have a choice, and but I'm saying their choice is at a slightly different level than the feminists were saying it. I was saying that I will always fight for and support women's choice to have children. But the second that a woman makes a choice to have a child, that choice involves, when you have a child, a responsibility to put the child's interests first. And so if we now know that the data shows so clearly that children do better when they have both parents, and both parents doing checks and balance parenting, and that moms don't feel so overwhelmed
Yeah.
when they have a father working with them to raise the children, and that dads, when they have a role in the child rearing process, feel fulfilled, feel that they have purpose. This is one of those few things in life where it's all win, 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 or lose, lose, lose.
Yeah.
When there's not a father in the operation, everyone loses. And especially when I was between marriages, I was married for more than a decade, and then had a 20-year period where I wasn't married, and now I've been together with my wife for 26 years. And in between that time, I dated almost all single moms, and
Wow.
I loved the kids and got along with them real well. But I began to see that the single moms had two words that they said most frequently. The first one was love. The second one was overwhelm.
Mm.
Not almost, that's not true. Every single mom I met, with zero exceptions, used the word overwhelm a great deal, like saying, and it was often like, oh, Warren, I really feel I could do better at work and move up in my career, but I don't want to be irresponsible to my son or my daughter. I love them more than I love my work. And so, but on the other hand, I feel like I do, I want to take my children on trips. I want to take them places that are special, to Disneyland, to Oregon, to explore this or explore that, or, we read something about it in the newspaper. I want to be able to be free to take them off there, but I can't without sacrificing my job, and the job is what feeds them. Yes, I get some child support, but it's not enough to bring the children up the way I want. I just feel so taxed, so overwhelmed all the
Yep.
time. And so I don't want women to go through their life being overwhelmed, having to make sacrifices on their jobs versus their children. And the best way not to do that is for having a good father in your life. But in order to have a father in your life that is good, and the type of father that's worthy of you and your children, we need to pay attention to the boy crisis. What's happening to boys and why it's happening to boys, and particularly to understand that the boy crisis ironically resides where fathers don't reside.
Yeah. So what you're saying, if I can articulate it in my own way here correctly, is that
Absolutely.
women mothers suffer when they try to play two parents rather than one parent as a mother. They
Yes.
try to play mother and father. I've heard this too, by the way, in my own generation. There's a lot of single moms in Central Florida. I
Mhm.
know more than I can count, and they say basically the same things you're saying. It hasn't changed from my
Yes.
generation.
Yes.
My question though is this came to mind when you were speaking is, and I haven't seen you. Maybe I missed it, but do you have thoughts on basically not only the role of two parents in raising a child and the benefits for that are immense? Do you have thoughts on the masculinity or the male role of uncles and grandfathers and extended family and
Mhm.
parenting, and not parenting, but contributing to say a boy's life growing up? I recently became an uncle myself about 8 months ago. I have a little nephew now. It's amazing. I love it. But I haven't heard a lot of discussion about that. Even in the men's community, it's mostly, and I like that. It's a lot of discussion, fathers,
Mhm.
boys, and men, and their rights and the issues. But you don't hear so much about uncles and grandfathers and extended family like that. Do you have any work on that or discussion?
Yes, there's a fair. There's two things in the Boy Crisis book that deal with that a lot. First is the chapter on what can a single mother do. So the first thing I
Got it.
explain is, first you need to value the different parenting styles of men versus women. Until you understand the different parenting styles of dads and what that leads to, you will not be able to help a man see that he's valued, see that he's needed, and you will give gatekeeping signals, about the father that lets the child climb the tree, the father that lets the child go to a pickup game at school and gets into a fight with some of the kids that they pick up the game with, the mother will experience that as being irresponsible. So if you don't understand those differences and how they contribute to the child's positive development, you will not incorporate a stepfather well, a grandfather well, an uncle well, a male mentor well. You'll always be suspicious. You'll always be limiting them, and you'll always be getting less than you can out of them. So that's that's step number one. So master those differences and communicate the value of any man you're involving in your child's life with that. Second, if you are a single mom and with all that I've said, you cannot persuade the father to be re-involved. Or the father is so irresponsible or is in prison and can't get out, then move to a number of other options. Number one is look for a sport that your child may be good in. If she or he is fairly good in a sport, start helping them get the discipline to be better at that sport, and then get them involved in that sport, especially a team sport. But watch out for who the male coach is. So if you have a couple of different sports that your kid is good at, but the coach at school is more empathetic and connected and has a reputation for really guiding boys, not caring so much about winning, but caring about every boy on the team developing, encourage your child to go to that sport. When I was raising my daughter, our daughters didn't want to play a soccer or any sport at all. And I said, I was a stepfather, and I said, you don't have an option. You can have an option as to which sport you can choose, but you don't have an option to not play the sports. And they finally did choose a sport, but only because mom finally got on board on that issue of the children choosing a sport. And it was one of the best experiences of their growing up years. But it sometimes takes a parent being very strict about that. So here's here's two things you can do. I'm going to give you two lists of things you can do if there's a divorce. Number one is there's a chapter in The Boy Crisis called The 4 Must-Dos of Divorce. And briefly, the 4 must-dos are that there's an equal amount of fathering and mothering that the children have after divorce. Number 2 is that the children do not hear any bad-mouthing from father to mother or mother to father. Number 3 is that the parents live within about 20 minutes drive time from each other, because if they don't, the children don't want to go over to the other parent's home and miss the soccer practice or miss the birthday party of a friend, and it takes them away from their social connections and what they learn from sports. And number 4, this is the most recent finding, is that the children who do the best are the ones whose parents are in continuing, and the emphasis is on the word continuing, relationship counseling or communication counseling. So don't just go to counseling when you have a fight over something that's an emergency, because the emergency often means a deadline, and it means that you don't have the time to understand the other one's best intent. So you make accusations about why the other person is wrong, and you don't hear them out. And when you go to long-term counseling, you as little as once a month, you will find that your children will not just benefit from the two of you doing better with each other, but realizing that they're not so afraid of marriage, because marriage will end up with a divorce that will end up with the parents bickering, and you're teaching your children how to communicate. When my stepdaughter had her first significant problem with a boyfriend, and they came to me, and I was working with them on that, my stepdaughter interrupted me and says, "That's what you and mom do." And then, "That's what you and mom do." And I never even know that she noticed that before. But as soon as it was articulated for her, it became very clear to her that so the role modeling is very important.
Sounds like you're teaching by example, basically, and actions speak louder than words,
Yes, example. And then also, if I were to have done that better, I would have done some more good work around family dinner nights to make sure that I articulated what was happening, as well as had that just be discovered on an unconscious level. The next thing is, if it's absolutely impossible to get a good man involved at a biological father level, then you must know how to work with a stepdad if you have a stepdad involved. Most stepdads become advisors. You want to make sure that you value the stepdad's involvement enough, the stepfather's way of parenting, to know that his likelihood of having a tough love approach to your children is very valuable to balance your love approach to the children. And so don't just make him an advisor. Understand his reasoning and incorporate it with an equal amount of influence and power. Otherwise, you'll waste the stepfather. Grandfather and grandmother are very important to get involved. Grandfather can be very helpful, but understand the differences between grandfather's values from his generation and the values that you want to create for your generation. For grandfather, a Frankfurter may have been just fine. For you, maybe the Frankfurter doesn't have the nutrition that you want. But how to communicate those differences are very important. Next, get your children involved in Cub Scouts. The Cub Scouts have done a lot of work on developing character. Children that are involved with Cub Scouts, boys that are involved in Cub Scouts for 2 years or more consistently, have a marked, measurable increase in character development. Get them involved in Boy Scouts. If you're a faith-based person, get them involved with your minister, your priest, your rabbi, your imam, but make sure that minister, priest, rabbi, or imam is a responsible, caring man, and make sure that he gets your son together with other boys his age, where they talk confidentially about their feelings and their fears and what's going on in them, because boys tend to stuff their fears and their feelings and then hide behind a mask of masculinity and feel that they have to appear strong when in fact they're feeling extremely weak. Like the buck elk that we were talking about, men's weakness is our facade of strength. And so make sure that that you do that involvement. Make sure you get your children involved, not just in sports, but look at the chapter on the liberal arts of sports, the 3 different types of sports that develop a well-rounded boy or a girl, by the way. That one applies to both sexes, but look out for a male mentor. Invite that male mentor over for dinner. Read the section on the boy crisis on how to construct family dinner nights so that they don't become family dinner nightmares. Get the
you have a lot of good sayings in the book like that, and little clever things like that. Another one I heard too is you said that mothers, God, what was it? Mothers have a right to their children. Fathers have to fight for their children.
Yes.
Have a divorce court.
One of the very sad things is, and every father listening to this who's had a divorce will sort of recognize this, that we are living in a culture now where the basic philosophy is that mothers have a right to children and dads have to fight for children. Yeah. The reason this is such a crime is I do a lot of expert witness work, but almost helping the judges understand the importance of fathers to the children and the importance of fathers with mothers to the children. But I have to tell you that the people who call me, they've spent an average of $70 to $100,000 before they've called me, and then the cost of me, their lawyer. Often, sometimes they have to pay for the mother's lawyers. It means that if you don't have between $150,000 and $250,000, you don't have much of a chance of having an equal amount of time with your children in most states except for Kentucky, and that's really.
Is Kentucky the one state with equal shared parenting, something like that?
Yes. There's a problem with a couple of problems with the law, but for the most part, it's the fairest law in the nation on that issue. And so,
would you say that law should be an example for the other states to model after?
Yes, with the one exception that I'm talking about, and it's too technical to get into it here. But yes, do take a look at the Kentucky law, and that is the closest to a model that for the future. For sure. Nice. But the basic model is very simple, which is when children when there's a divorce, first of all there needs to be I think, a requirement on the part of the courts that the parents, before the judge gets involved not with a mediator, but with a couple's communication counselor. So the couple learns how to understand and communicate with each other. Mediation is just resolving the differences in who wants what and what type of times and schedules. That's just the mechanics of it. The real good work needs to be done by good communication first, to see if you can restore your marriage, and if you can't, to restore the way you communicate about the differences after marriage. And so that's the, and then once that is done, that the law reads that children have an equal amount of time with both parents, that the parents live within about 20 miles from each other, that there's no bad mouthing. And when there is a violation of the bad mouthing, if one is doing violating those things or doesn't want the other parent involved, that's the sign for the judge to have the primary parent be the one that is facilitative of the other parent's involvement.
Wow. Yeah, this sounds great, and it's I guess the reason we don't have it is because it sounds way too reasonable.
It's
Default. I mean, it's.
It is.
I
It
mean,
is. I wish I could agree. I wish I could disagree with you. So,
yeah,
and the long part of to end that thing is, so yes, every one of these fathers realizes that, the mothers have the right to children, and we dads have to fight for children, and that's the ultimate lose-lose situation.
yeah. You mentioned the money issue as well, and I've heard this as well. I know guys who've gone through this stuff. Guys who've lost. They've fought through family court like that. They've spent 50,000. Guys I know personally and more. And then divorces, of course, can get even much nastier than that. Losing money there. But yeah,
Oh,
it's the money issue though is amazing because most Americans don't have even a few months of savings saved up. Never mind $100,000 laying around.
exactly. And then the fathers that do. So what I feel badly about is, here I am working with, that 1% of fathers that have that money to be able to afford all these lawyers and to do the fight. And, whereas the children growing up in poor families, they're the ones that need the fathers as much or more than the
Yeah,
children growing up in wealthy families and wealthy neighborhoods with good schools, et cetera. And
yeah.
so this is really a crime. And we're paying, when I did the calculation of the cost for this, for the Boy Crisis book, I calculated more than $1 trillion a year is what
I
it
saw
costs
that.
us to repair,
Yeah,
clean up the mess of much greater likelihood of these boys being criminals, and the 700% increase in the prison population since 1970, the cost of maintaining prisons. I looked at the mass shooters and the school shooters. They're almost all dad deprived boys.
yep.
Looked at the ISIS recruits. They're almost all dad deprived boys. And so when you look at dad deprivations, the cost of cleaning up the mess of Homeland Security with ISIS, the Patriot Act, the cost of prisons, the cost of all of these ramifications of the school shootings, the security systems, et cetera, to say nothing of our psychic insecurity and shame.
And there's
This
also
is
lost opportunity, right? Because these boys are not productive. They're not building businesses. They're not building careers. They're not paying, making money and paying taxes. So there's
they're
lost
they're
opportunity there too, right?
they're soaking our taxes, not paying our taxes.
Yeah. Well, we're getting pretty far in the interview. Before we wrap up at some point, I do want to go on some current events. So you actually put out here we go, an opinion piece in the Washington Examiner just a couple days ago, and rediscovering fatherhood in the plague year. You guys can Google this, and we'll put a link in the comments or description after the show. And you actually talk about fatherhood, the importance of it this year, as well as for the riots and things going on right now. Can you talk to me about the importance of fatherhood for the protests and the riots going on currently in America, or its relevance to that?
Yes, absolutely. We're all in agreement that Black Lives Matter, and some of us really are passionate about that. And yet we're missing a couple of very important parts of the conversation. The most important part of which is that if we really care about Black lives, we have to remember that the African American community is the community that suffers most from dad deprivation. When the Moynihan Report was done in 1965, Moynihan worked for both Nixon, Johnson, and Kennedy, and was a labor secretary and a sociologist and a U.S. senator. And he was one of the most respected people in politics. And so he was assigned to do the Moynihan report to find out why crime had increased so much in inner cities. So he did this, and everybody was afraid, like, oh my God, he's going to find out that African Americans are inferior, they're more prone to commit crime. We found out something very different, which is that the crime was committed almost always among families in which there was no father involvement, usually unmarried families. And it was so. And at that time, in 1965, only 25% of children growing up in African inner cities were growing up without dads. Today, the figure is not 25% anymore. It is 74, 75% of African American children are growing up without dads. Interestingly, in the Caucasian community, at that time, 1965, the percentage of Caucasian children growing up without dads was 3.1%. Now it is 35%. It's a 12-fold increase in Caucasian children growing up without dads, and the crimes in Caucasian families have increased enormously as well.
This is true basically across all races and demographics in America, right? Single motherhood skyrocketed.
It has skyrocketed enormously, and so what we see, what Moynihan saw was where the lack of father involvement increases, your crime increases. Where father involvement increases, crime decreases. And it's not just crime. Crime is just a symptom, of course, of a boy who's purposeless, who's depressed, whose testosterone is not being channeled well. And so the point here is that if we really care about Black lives, but in addition to focusing on the systemic racism that involves the police, we need to focus on the systemic sexism that keeps fathers out of the family, and get fathers more involved, and recognize that the systemic racism is not equal male to female. It is the males that are 25 times as the African American male, and is 25 times as likely to be in prison, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, as the African American female. It's a huge gap. It's the white, it's the African American male versus female that is also 20 times as likely to be stopped by police, shot by police. And so we need to look at what's happening particularly to dad-deprived males, and to focus on the rejuvenating our Black male boys with father involvement, and saying to Black fathers, African American fathers, we need you. Your sons need you. Your daughters also need you. Your wife needs you, and the government needs to stop to reverse the incentives, to make sure that women who are poor that live with the father get the income to a greater degree than women who are poor who do not live with the father. And so we need to support families. We need to support those families when they go to communication counseling, and they do the work to learn how to be good communicators with each other, and therefore good checks and balance parents.
For the viewers as well, I wanted to pull up another article, exactly what you're just speaking on. This is another article you put out, an opinion piece, I believe, with Town Hall. And the actual title, of course, like you were speaking on, is If Black Lives Matter, Black Dads Must Matter. And like I mentioned before we went live, I saw Stefan Molyneux tweet the other day, hashtag Black Fathers Matter. And, hitting on a lot of the same topics and points you're speaking on. Paul Elam as well pointed out, he actually was reviewing the Black Lives Matter website, and he made a point that they actually don't mention fathers at all. It's unfortunate and sad, but so they mention a little bit about family stuff. A lot of it's actually they want to get rid of the nuclear family, but they mention mothers and parents and fathers. Black fathers is completely omitted. There's no mention of it.
This is absolutely accurate. Now the overall Black Lives Matter movement is a very different sort of spirit than the people that created the Black Lives Matter website or the original organization, which is much more radical, much more anti-nuclear family.
They're all feminists, I believe, right? All three of them.
Yes, but in addition to that, it is really a very it is very like fathers don't matter website implicitly, because fathers on the website are not discussed in any way of inclusivity.
Yep.
This is the huge mistake. I chair, as you know, a coalition to create a White House Council on Boys and Men, and I've always been I've been more politically liberal growing up than and now, for the most part, than conservative. But the conservatives are the ones that really understand fathers' issues and men's issues, and the importance of the family. And I went out to work with the you're putting them up there. This is I interviewed some 10 Democratic presidential candidates a year ago, April, when they were in Iowa, and had and I found that 7 of them those interviews are on my YouTube channel. So if you're interested in seeing the actual interviews, they're on my YouTube channel, and so and they're being flashed right here now. But the important thing here is that the Democratic candidates were able to hear me on the importance of fatherlessness and the importance of what's happening with boys, but their campaign managers were very persuasive in persuading the candidates not to speak up about that, because they felt that if the candidates did speak up about that, they would lose their feminist base, they would lose their female base, because what they were supporting was women's choice to be able to raise children by themselves. And today in the United States, 53% of women under 30 who raise children raise them by them without being married, and usually without father involvement except for a few years. And so there's this enormous propensity to for the campaign managers to say some version of, no, we want women to have freedom of choice, to be able to be the ones to have the children, the right to children after marriage. We think that women know the children best. And this was like, and so the ultimately, except
so much for equality.
Yes, and so liberals, we are handing the the next election over to President Trump, because there are millions of millions. If you feel like you would not like to have President Trump as the next president, you need to get your act together when it comes to caring about boys and caring about fathers and incorporating them. That freedom of choice is the decision you can make to have a child, but you make a decision to have a child, your obligation is to think of what's best for the child, not what's best for your freedom to go off and marry another man and move out of state and have the child not see the biological dad very often.
And I think I heard you say, just to clarify, were you saying that Andrew Yang was the most responsive out of the Democratic candidates to it?
Yes. In fact, listening to the interview with Andrew Yang is very helpful. And he did manage to get 1 or 2 sentences out in one of the debates about, the challenges that are happening with boys. And John Hickenlooper was very receptive with me. You can see a full interview I did with John on the YouTube channel as well. But when push came to shove, he backed off from making a statement about that, even in his Senate campaign now. So that's very sad, because he's a good man who understands these issues, but he doesn't want to lose his Democratic base.
Yeah, that's tragic. Speaking on the White House Council of Men and Boys, I wanted to ask you about that more directly. And you've been all over the news with that, Fox News, and like you're saying, the TEDx talk you did on it and all these things. You've been working on the White House Council of Men and Boys for over 10 years now. Because you were initially invited to help form one for women and girls, and then you got this one going as well now. Or how's the progress on this going?
Very good in many respects. I was at the White House. Somebody from the Trump administration discovered me talking about fathers' issues at one of the fatherhood summits, and I got invited to the White House, and they had 14 people from the White House, Department of Justice, and HHS sit with me, and I talked with them about the importance of fathers. They were very excited about it. Nice. And they asked me to construct a presentation that President Trump would have potentially have given this Father's Day on this, and I did a presentation.
Wow.
created a presentation for that. However, it looks like there isn't movement along those lines. The fear seems to be that President Trump talking about family would draw too much criticism because of his own 3 marriages.
Yeah.
And so he's sort of staying away from that. There is talk about putting Pence on this issue and having him speak up on this issue because he's has much more of a solid family background. But so far that hasn't been done. But we're in the process of developing a channel to Pence, and the speech that I created for President Trump to give for Father's Day, which of course would go through speechwriters. So I don't want to give any any illusions here that he'll take my speech and give it per se. He'll do it in his own words.
But even to give something based on what you wrote, that would be amazing for a sitting U.S. president to do that, to speak on Father's Day about fatherhood. That would be, that'd be amazing.
It certainly would, and so the pushback that I got from the Democratic candidates and every single campaign manager was so different from the receptivity, the comments at the White House when I was there was like, wow, we have never heard this at this level of depth, and this is so important, and we must do something about it. We have a moral obligation to doing something about it. And from a liberals looking at at conservatives, you may think moral obligation is something that you have the only that you have a dominance over or a monopoly over moral obligation. But in fact, I hope if maybe I communicate anything during this talk with you, it's that that both parties care a lot. And both parties have a lot of people that do care. Some that care so much that they think that they will do anything to remain in power, thinking that they're the ones that are right. And of course, I think on the issue of fathers and families, Republicans really get this issue to a much, much greater degree.
It sounds like basically the feminists have I don't know how to explain it. They've pushed the Democratic Party. They've almost forced the candidates away from fatherhood issues. Like you're saying, they even if they support it in private, they did it in public. It's gonna cost them getting nominated or getting elected. It's actually costly, and there's consequences to it.
There's enormous consequences to it, and one of the consequences is that there's probably about 20 million parents that have children, mostly boys, who are fatherless, who are boys who are failures to launch, boys who are depressed, boys who are withdrawing, boys who are addicted in one way or the other to the video games, to porn, to all the things I mentioned at the outset of the show. And those parents, many of them, if one political leader, whether it's Biden or Trump, started saying, we need to pay attention to our boys need fathers. I'm concerned about the 50 different areas of developmental regression that boys are involved in. Those parents, those voting parents, their sons are more important than their Democratic or Republican label. People will vote for the hearts of a candidate who is willing to speak up in behalf of their sons and behalf of their daughters, ultimately as well, with the father involvement. And so one of the political parties is missing an enormous opportunity here by both parties basically ignoring this issue. But so far, I have to give the Republican Party credit for moving much more to being much more receptive, facilitative, and enthusiastic about this issue than the Democratic Party has been.
Yeah. And so do you think we can, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do you think we can expect, in a high likelihood in the coming years, an actual White House Council on Men and Boys? Because currently you're still in the commission early phases of it, right?
No, 11 years into it.
11 years, yeah. 11 years. I meant
from my age, that's very, very minimum amount of time.
Yeah. That's a lot. For me, that's a lot. The third of my life.
I'm playing with myself or mocking myself, of course.
But is it likely to get actually? So it's still in the commission phase, though. Is kind of what I meant. That's not finished yet.
It's still in the coalition phase of it's the coalition to create a White House Council on Boys and Men, and while there is receptivity to it, it hasn't been done yet. And the White House Council on Women and Girls, if you're interested in that journey, you can take a look at the White House Council on Boys and Men website. But the brief version of that journey was, because I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, when President Obama formed the White House Council on Women and Girls, I was called by the White House to be on the board of on an advisory group for the White House Council on Women and Girls. Of course, I said yes. They ended up turning out that that council was never formed. But at any rate, I said I'm happy to join that and be in the advisory group for that. However, there's a real need for a White House Council on Boys and Men as well. Yeah. And the woman who called me said, oh, well, that's not in my, I don't have the authority to do that. But if you create a proposal, I'll help you get it up the ladder. And so I got 34 of the top leaders in the country on boys and men's issues, and the head of the Boy Scouts, the head of Men's Health magazine, et cetera. And we spent 18 months hammering out, because I was committed to making this coalition a multi-partisan coalition, by which I mean Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, and people that were somewhere in a mixture of all.
Independents.
And we hammered that out for 18 months, created, I think, a really outstanding proposal. And then I've very, very significantly updated that in the Boy Crisis book.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like that inspired, or a lot of that ended up in the Boy Crisis, basically, as an inspiration for it.
There's when we did this 11 years ago, I didn't have nearly the data that I had today, because I hadn't done as much research on it. I've been researching intensely in the last 10 years.
So we're still, we're pretty far in the interview. Before we wrap up, eventually, I don't think we can end the show without discussing Father's Day, which is tomorrow.
Yes.
And I actually found this article that was published. It was, you were interviewed basically for it by the Tennessean. And I thought it was actually current, but it's actually last year, so 2019. And you were speaking on the issue of Father's Day, and you said, the title of this is, "They're Just as Needed as Mothers. Warren Farrell thinks Father's Day gets overshadowed." So you're actually a father yourself. You have 2 daughters, right? Biological daughters.
Yeah. No, two stepdaughters from my mom, from my wife, who's my wife is the mom.
My mistake. But can you discuss to me the importance of fatherhood? I mean, other than a president speaking on Father's Day, which would be stunning. We hear a lot of, tomorrow, I'm sure on Instagram, for the women my age, millennials and stuff, I'm going to see a lot of memes and things like that about, mothers do everything and they can be both. And they'll even celebrate. It's bizarre, they're a woman and they'll celebrate being a father in this kind of weird, internet language. Yeah. But can you discuss the importance of Father's Day and how it's treated in modern culture?
Yeah, well, it used to be father knows best, and now it's fathers know less. And so a boy growing up is looking at TV and seeing these bumbling, idiots called fathers, sometimes kind and well-meaning idiots, but incompetent. And he's also hearing that the future is female. This is not the best formula for inspiring a boy to think about his future. But what is missing is, I was mentioning earlier in the show that boys and girls do worse in more than 50 areas of development when there's not a significant amount of father involvement, and that there's reasons that ends up being the case. One is just having half your genes being the genes of the dad, but the other part is understanding all those differences between dad's greater propensity to discipline, to create the tough part of tough love, to do things like roughhousing that creates bonding with the children, but also doing boundary enforcement and saying that there will be no more roughhousing if you're not considerate of your brother's or your sister's needs. Children being dads are much more likely to take the children out camping to areas that might be a little bit precarious, or let them walk a little further without them right behind them or next to them or holding their hand. Let them get lost for a little while within an area of safety. Dads are often like roller coasters, providing a lot of excitement, but with safety at the bottom of it. And letting the children get a little bit hurt on a playground, getting into a fight, and then treating the that experience of the fight as something that they can talk through with the child, as being able to learn how to avoid the fight in the future, as opposed to being there at the playground protecting them from the fight. Dads have a philosophy internally for the most part. And again, some dads are exactly the opposite of this. Some dads are irresponsible, and some mothers are exactly this way. And so there's so many differences in dad style parenting that lead to those 50 developmental advances that children with dad involvement have. And so it's incumbent upon both moms and dads to not be an overwhelmed mom, to involve dads, to call upon our dads. I've asked the White House to create a Fathers Warriors program to train boys from an early age to be involved, caring, emotionally intelligent father, and to work with women to desire a father as a mate, a father that's involved maybe full-time, while the woman might be full-time involved in breaking glass ceilings. Many women say to me, "Oh, I can't be a have-it-all woman like a man can be a have-it-all man." And that's not true. A woman can be a have-it-all woman if she chooses a man from among the men that she's interested in, who is more interested in being emotionally engaged, perhaps full-time with the children, while she goes out and makes that money that she wants to make and be a status success and have responsibility in a positive and creative way. And so if she can do that while he's home taking care of the children, as long as she respects him for being home and taking care of the children, she can be a have-it-all woman. She can have a career, she can have a good marriage, and she can have successfully raised children. And that's a way of doing it. But you have to value a man's contribution as a father in order to do that.
I can just hear the feminists screeching now, saying that a mother, a woman need a man, and a mother needs a father. Yeah, it makes perfect sense, though. Yeah, the only way to do the have it all is to actually facilitate an environment where that's even possible. Otherwise,
Yes.
you just end up overwhelmed and stressed out and anxiety ridden and all that.
And you have to be a brave woman for that, because many times women, if they marry a man whose goal it is to be full-time dad and maybe try something experimental when he has time while he's raising the children that may or may not make money, her women friends will often say, "Well, what about that doctor you dated? Why didn't I introduce you to Jim, the
Yeah,
lawyer?"
they'll chirp,
And
chirp.
so she'll feel less respected by her women friends if she chooses a man whose specialization is emotional intelligence rather than economic success.
Yeah. One of the issues I want to discuss is you focused heavily in the book. Well, first of all,
I promised my wife I'd be finished by 9:30 or 10 o'clock.
no problem, no problem. We can wrap up.
Maybe one more question and we'll finish up.
Yeah, I guess my final question. Well, yeah, let's just end it on this. This is a kind of wrap up question I had, and we've gone about 90 minutes now. How do you want to be remembered? You're in your 70s now. I think you're going to live well into your 90s, maybe 100, like I said. Based specifically, I'm hopeful, first of all, for your voice to be around for a long time, as long as possible. But specifically in the book, you actually went into physical health, mental health, supplements, nutrition, things that are very consistent with what our speakers at the 21 Convention have advocated for years. Other authors you might know, like Mark Sisson, Dr. Paul Jaminet, Dave Asprey, and people like that. But how do you want to be remembered specifically, other than agitating feminists and advocating for boys? Is there anything more in men, obviously, in fathers?
Yes. I'd like to be remembered as somebody who basically feels that we're all in the same family boat, and that when either sex wins, both sexes, when only one sex wins, both sexes lose. I'd like to be remembered as somebody who cares about gender liberation, liberating both sexes from the rigid roles of the past, to more intelligent, flexible roles for our future. And I'd also like to be remembered for the couples communication work that I do, getting both sexes to listen to each other and to facilitate the ability of each person, before they articulate their perspectives, to fully hear the perspective of the person that they love, that they live with, whether that's their parents, whether that's their children, to understand how to run family dinner nights so that they're really effective in allowing every child to be an emotionally intelligent child. If I can be remembered for those things, that would be my, and for being, I hope, a really good husband to my wife, and hopefully a good dad to my children.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Well, with that said, where can our viewers find out more about you, other than links in the description, of course, under the video? And you mentioned you had a workshop coming up as well on Zoom, couples counseling.
Yeah, I've been doing for the last week or so. Well, actually, the last 30 years, I've developed a couples communication workshop that I've been able to put on Zoom, or get ready to have put on Zoom. That should be available in July or August. And I'd say on the relation to the boy crisis book, that the paperback version on Amazon is the least expensive way of getting it. And the Audible version, I have received just overwhelmingly good feedback about. I've read the Audible version of the Boy Crisis, and John Gray has read the ADHD section on the Boy Crisis himself. And a lot of both men and women are responding very positively to the Audible section.
Oh, so you both narrated it. I didn't know
Yes,
that.
we both got in the studio. It took me 5 days to read
Nice.
my part of the book, and
Yeah.
and John read his part on ADHD.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate your time. Love the interview. Love the content. Love the book. And I'm going to buy more of your books finally. I've been hearing about them for years. The older ones, especially Myth and Male Power and things like that.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time greatly.
It's really, you just asked great questions, listened really well. And I like the fact that you care about moving these issues forward, and you have the guts and courage to do it.
Yes, sir. Same to you. Everyone else, appreciate you guys tuning in today live. We'll see you next Saturday with speaker and author Jack Donovan, author of The Way of Men. Warren, once again, thank you for your time. Everyone, make sure you go buy his book on Amazon now, The Boy Crisis, and many others. Just go on Amazon, search Warren Farrell, and you'll see them all pull up. Thank you, everybody, and we're going to tune out.
Total pleasure.